Good day, friends. Welcome back. My name is Pastor Cliff Sikowe, and I'm greeting you from Puluso Ministries. We are a traveling teaching ministry, and we pride ourselves in equipping members of churches, different churches, on how to read the Bible. And maybe one would be asking, why is it important for me to know how to read the Bible? Well, you'll be surprised to know that the Bible is based on a particular culture. It was not written to us, but it was written for us. So it is important for us to understand how the primary audience would have understood what was said to them or what was written to them. And secondly, it is important for us to understand what has been said in the text so that we can apply the lessons that we can draw from the text itself, so that we know exactly what God intended to say to us, or what the Bible writers were actually saying, trying to bring out the message of God to his people. So today, to demonstrate that, I'm going to invite you to look with me in the book of John, and John chapter 4 is where we're going to be reading. And one of the things I would like to encourage you, everyone out there, is to read the Bible not just in verses, but look at it as a whole, so that you can understand how things transpire over time, so that you can understand and get a bigger picture of what God is trying to communicate across towards the human race. Now, as you page through your Bible or your devices, as you click on them, I would like to encourage you to click on the subscription button on our YouTube channel, to, if you like the content that we're bringing across to you, so that every time we post new videos, you can get a notification of the new content that we have uploaded. So as we read together in John chapter 4, and I'll begin reading in verse 5, so you can understand how this text would have probably been understood at the time of Jesus. Now I read in verse 5 from John chapter 4, and it reads as follows. It says, "Now he came to Samaria, a Samaritan town called Sychar, near the plot of the land that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, so Jesus, since he was tired from the journey, sat right down beside the well. It was about noon. A Samaritan woman came to draw water. Jesus said to her, 'Give me some water to drink,' for his disciples had gone into town to buy some supplies. So the Samaritan woman said to him, 'How can you, a Jew, ask me, a Samaritan woman, for water to drink?' For Jews use nothing in common with Samaritans." Jesus answered her, "If you had known the gift of God, and who it is who said to you, 'Give me some water to drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." "Sir," the woman said to him, "you have no bucket, and the well is deep. Where then do you get this living water? Surely you are not greater than our ancestor Jacob, are you? For he gave us this well to drink from it, and he drank from it, along with his sons and his livestock." Jesus replied, "Everyone who drinks some of this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks some of the water that I will give him will never be thirsty again. But the water that I will give him will become in him a fountain of water springing up to eternal life." The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water, so that I will not be thirsty, nor have to come here to draw water." He said to her, "Go call your husband and come back here." The woman replied, "I have no husband." Jesus said to her, "Right, you are right when you said you have no husband. For you have had 5 husbands, and the one you are living with right now is not your husband. This you said truly." The woman said to him, "Sir, I see that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped in this mountain, and you people say that the place where people must worship is in Jerusalem." Jesus said to her, "Believe me, woman, a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You people worship what you don't know. We worship what we know, because salvation is from the Jews. But a time is coming, and now it is here, when the true worshipper will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father seeks such people to be his worshippers. God is spirit, and the people who worship him must worship him in spirit and truth." The woman said to him, I know that the Messiah is coming, the one called the Christ. Whenever he comes, he will tell us everything. Jesus said to her, I, the one speaking to you, I am he. Now at that very moment, his disciples came back. They were shocked because he was speaking with a woman. Now, no one said, what do you want? No, why are you speaking with her? Then the woman left her water jar, went off into the town, and said to the people, come and see a man who told me everything I ever did. Surely he can be the Messiah, can he? So they left the town and began coming to Jesus. Now, this is a text we have just read together, and it is quite striking that many Christians have interpreted this text in various ways. And but when you look at it, it is quite perplexing, because some of the things that have been said about this text, as you will see as we go through the text, are not actually in the text. Now, let me begin by giving you a little bit of background on on the text itself. You see, Samaritans were very superstitious people. They lived in a town, as we read together, called Sychar. So they didn't like people coming through into their village to as visitors or foreigners who did not belong to their community. So every time a person would come into their village, they would as a person leaves, they would sweep the footprints of that particular person, because they believed that they were bringing evil spirits into their community. So they would sweep those footprints and weave their brooms up in the air to vehemently dispel all the evil spirit the person may have brought in. So now another crucial thing is that we find the word here, Sychar, which is actually an Anglicization of the word shikar, which means alcohol or beer in Hebrew, because you have a word for wine, which is yayin, and for beer is shakar. So basically, Jesus is going to a village of drunkards. That's what the text is actually telling you. So now, in verse 7 and 9, we have Jesus conversing with this Samaritan woman. And what we're seeing here is that Jesus asked this woman for a drink, and this woman is not very polite to Jesus. She says, how is it that you are a Jew and you ask me for some water to drink? And for us to understand here what is actually going on, we have to understand the culture, because Jesus says to that Samaritan woman, give me a drink. And now, secondly, the disciples had gone into town to buy some food. But it is definitely not a town of Samaritans, so they had gone far beyond where they were actually going, because they do not share anything in particular with Jews themselves. So we have two things here. We have a Samaritan woman, and we have the disciples going off to buy some food. Now, it is crucial here to understand the animosity between Jews and Samaritans. Now, the first statement here, the woman says, you are a Jew. And the second statement, a word which is very crucial in the reading of the text, is a woman. So now, Samaritans were regarded by Jews as ritually impure. So they were seen as unclean, so to speak. So they could not share any vessel with them. And they were forbidden from interacting with them whatsoever. So, secondly, it says here, woman. So a person has to understand that in ultra Orthodox Judaism, there's a saying that goes on saying, you must choose yourself a teacher or a rabbi, and do not multiply your conversations with women, and study the Torah day and night. So this is the statement. So in Judaism, speaking to women was seen as a form of idleness. So Jesus talks to this woman, and as they're talking, one has to understand that Jesus is breaking all the rules of about this interaction between Jews with non-Jews. Now, it is crucial also for us to understand who are these Samaritans. So, this now becomes crucial for one to understand the Old Testament background, because only in the book of Kings, 2 Kings, verse 17, chapter 17, from 16 onwards, you can read it at the comfort of your home. It tells us a bit of a story that in 722, before the common era, or some will say before Christ, there were 10 tribes that belonged to the northern Israel, which were known as Israel, and at down below, there were 2 tribes, Benjamin and Judah. So the 10 tribes that were up in the vicinity of Samaria did not worship God, so they worshipped idols. And God, one of the things in the Old Testament says, if you worship other gods, God will remove you from the land. And it's exactly what he did. So he removed them from the land. So the Assyrian king came and he took them out of the land. So they went into Syria and all these other provinces, and they assimilated basically with other nations that were non-Jews. So what the king of Syria did, he brought people from different places, from Babylon, from Cuth, from Ava, from Hamath and Sepharvaim, and placed them in the region of Samaria. You'll find that in verse 24 of chapter 17 of 2 Kings. So as they are there, people start complaining that people are dying. People in Samaria, the people he had now brought, the king had brought into to replace the actual 10 tribes of the Jews. They did not know how the God of the Jews is supposed to be worshipped. So lions, according to the text, says were killing people because they were transgressing the law of God, so to speak. So as this was happening, the king was notified that the people who live in that place don't know the law of the God of the land, because in the Old Testament you have gods had a different territory that they occupied. So God Yahweh, whom we call Jehovah, was the primary god in Judea and the northern parts of Israel, where the 10 tribes or Samaria was located. So since they did not know the law of the land, so bad things happened to them. So a priest was now sent in, which were deported pretty much 300 years ago, because this is 722, and in the time Jesus is alive is about the same in the first century. So there's about a 300-year lapse between the time of their deportation and the priest now being summoned to come back into the land. So when he comes back into the land, he had absolutely no idea, because these people had assimilated, doing their strange things and worshipping different gods according to different provinces where they had been brought from. So now in verse 9, if you look at the text of John 4, it says, now Jesus was sitting at the well, and many of us, because we have been taught based on Greek teachings, basically on how to understand things, and we basically think in the modern world that things were in the same way as they are today as what it was in the ancient world. And you will be surprised to find out that things were not as such. It was not so. Because when I say a well, or when you read the term well in your Bible, you picture a well where you have to put a rope and a bucket and sort of let it down and draw the water. But this is not actually the well that Jesus is talking about. What we're finding here, based on excavation as well, that can attest to what I'm saying, the well was deep, not in the depth as you would understand it in the Greco kind of thinking, but you had a winding kind of road that went all the way down to where the water was sort of located. Even animals, I mean, the text tells us that even animals drank from that well. So it is not that kind of well that we are thinking about, or what one would typically think about in the Western world. It is a well that you had to wind down and get down to the bottom and get some water and come right back up. So Jesus is saying to this woman, I want you to get me this water. So we don't actually see her response, because we're reading the text. Written text is not the same as the spoken text. So basically what Jesus is saying to this woman is an insult, because she's saying, how dare you, a Jew, you want to send me down there at the bottom of this winding road to draw water for you and bring it back up here again, and on top of that you don't have anything to actually drink from or draw water with. So it's actually the woman, she's infuriated. But now Jesus says, if only you knew the gift of God, or it is who you're talking to, I would give you living water. Now, it's important for us to know what Jesus is talking about when he says, I would give you living water. Because in Israel, it's basically a desert. So you don't have a lot of bodies of water. We have the Dead Sea, which is located in Israel, but and Jordan, which actually provides living water, because living water refers to water that is flowing, not water that is stagnant. So this woman assumes that Jesus is talking about some stream that that Jesus knows of. And just to bring you back again, the Dead Sea is dead water on top of that, because it contains potassium chloride, and if you were to drink from potassium chloride, it will basically flush your digestive tract and your digestive system. So in verse 11, as we carry on in reading this text, the woman says to Jesus, "Sir, you have no bucket, and the well is deep. Where do you get this living water?" And she says in verse 12, "Are you greater than our ancestor Jacob, who gave us the well, nor his sons who drank from it?" So it's important for us to understand that Jacob is not actually the ancestor of Samaritans or people who were deported from these other provinces to reside in Samaria, but Jacob is the ancestor of Israelites or Jews, so to speak. So this woman is throwing an insult to Jesus, saying, you are a Jew. I'm actually a Jew, and you are not a Jew. That's what she's saying. And many of us will be insulted. We come from different cultures and different backgrounds. If someone who's not from your culture would walk up to you and say, you are not a Zulu, if maybe you are a Zulu or an Irish or whatever that you may be, and you know very well that they are not there, it will be an insult to you. And this is exactly what we have in the text. So Jesus says to her, "Well, everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but those who drink water will never be thirsty again." And now this woman gets confused because she doesn't quite get what Jesus is saying. He says, if you accept this water that I would have given you, it would gush off from your belly to up to eternal life. So this woman says, "Sir, give me this water so that I may never thirst again, nor even come here to draw water again." So what she's thinking that Jesus is trying to sell her some water. It's actually a business transaction. So she says, "Okay, give me this water. I want to see. Let's do a business deal here." Now, it is crucial here in verse 17 to understand how the discourse actually progresses. Now, Jesus says to her, "Go call your husband and come back." Now, it's important again for us to understand the Old Testament when we come to the New Testament, as I keep emphasizing, because if we don't, then we don't understand exactly what Jesus is talking about. Why all of a sudden is Jesus saying, "Go call your husband and come back here"? Well, in the Old Testament, it was important for a husband to carry the family ID because they lived in a cluster, what is called the father's house, or the father's house. That's what Jesus kept on referring to this. You read John 14, he says, "In my father's house." This was the setup that they had. So the father would be the head of the family, and everyone else would be would reside within that family setup. So his sons and daughters would be all in one family, and extended relatives would all be there, and he would be the head of this household. So that's how it was understood. So he himself, the father, carried the family ID. So if you wanted to claim or buy something or make a business deal, you could. And women back in the first century could do business transactions, but those business transactions had to be validated by their husbands. So the husband would normally come and imprint the ring onto a clay tablet to actually verify that they are who they claim to be. Today, in modern day, we use IDs. So you'll go to a bank if you want to apply for a loan or get some credit, and how do they verify that you are whom you claim to be? So you bring out your ID, and they can verify that you are the person whom you claim to be. So this was what was slightly different in the first century, where people had family IDs, and you would have to call them the father or a male representative who held on to this family ID. This was the practice, and if you go to some Islamic countries even today, this method is still practiced based on how the Semitic people lived. So it is crucial, because in Numbers 30 tells us exactly this, that if a woman wants to make a vow, it must be validated by a husband at home. So this is what happens. Jesus says, go call your husband. And the lady says, no, I have no husband. And Jesus says, you have answered correctly when you say you have no husband. He says to him, you have had 5, and the one whom you now have is not even your husband. And what you're saying, is true. That's what Jesus affirms. Now, it's important as we get to this part of the text to understand how the text develops as well. So the Samaritan lived in a very secluded place, as I explained. So we cannot read the text and bring out our mental impositions based on what we think would have happened in the first century of the time of Jesus. So it is also important to understand what the term husband means in the Bible, because it doesn't always mean a physical husband, but in the books like Hosea, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel, we'll find that a husband also refers to a relationship between Israel and God. So God is the husband and Israel is now the wife. So whenever Israel apostatized, they would be regarded as an adulterous wife by God. So the word husband in the book of John there, it is not necessarily referring to a husband and a wife kind of relationship, but it's talking about some sort of religious allegiance to God, the God of Israel. Now, in verse 19, the woman says to him, Sir, I see that you are a prophet. But she says, our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you say the place of worship must be in Jerusalem. Jesus said to her, Woman, he says, believe me, the hour is coming when those who worship the Father will neither worship him here or in this mountain. You worship what you don't know. We Jews worship what we know, because salvation is from the Jews. But the hour is coming, and it is now here, when the true worshipper will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For the Father seeks such a worship, those who worship him in this manner, because God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship him in truth and in spirit. So now it is crucial for us to understand here, because the conversation changes from talking about water, and all of a sudden it shifts to talking about worship. Why is that so? If you were listening attentively, you would have picked up that the husband relationship here, it is not necessarily a physical husband that the woman may have had, but it is a spiritual husband, just as I explained. So now, if you look further, the statements of Jesus are sandwiched between these two in verse 17 and 18. Because what is Jesus talking about? He's talking about worship. He's saying, you claim as a woman to be a daughter of Jacob, but look at the type of mess that you guys have. You claim to have the right kind of worship, but we Jews know what we worship, because salvation comes from us. Now, Jesus is not talking to this lady about some family situation that she has. He's talking about their religious setup that is at a mess. And Jesus is saying, I can help you, because salvation is from the Jews. Although one has to understand as well that Samaritans were in possession of the Torah, meaning the first 5 books of Moses. So now they viewed everyone else as imposters, even Jews. That is why they claimed that Jacob was their father. Now, why does Jesus says, you Jews, you don't know what you're worshiping. You've had 5 husbands. That's basically what Jesus is saying. Why is he saying 5 husbands, not 2, not 3, no 1? Why 5? Important again for us to understand the history and what happened. If you read in 2 Kings chapter 17 verse 30, from maybe for just for a bit of context, you can take it up from verse 29. It says, but every nation made gods of its own and put them in the shrines of high places. that the people of Samaria had made every nation in the city in which they lived. The people of Babylon made Succoth-Benoth. The people of Cuth made Negal. The people of Hamath made Ashima. And the Avites made Nibaz and Tartak. And the Ephravites burnt their children in the fire to Adramelech and Anamelech, the gods of Sepharvaim. So basically, when you read here, you can understand why Jesus is saying 5, not 1 or 2. Because a husband in the ancient world doesn't always mean a husband, but at times it means a spiritual relationship to whom you have paid your allegiance to, meaning your God is your husband. So Jesus is saying to her, the people who were brought in by the king of Assyria to reside in Samaria were taken from Babylon, and they made a god called Succoth-Benoth. That's number 1. The people of Cuth made Negal. That's number 2. And the people taken from Hamath made Ashima. That's number 3. And the Avavites made Nibzah and Tartak, which is number 4. The Sepharvites burnt their children in the fire to Adramelech and Anamelech. This is number 5. So if you read the text carefully, you can see that Jesus is not making up this. He knows the situation, the religious situation that the Samaritans adhere to, and he's bringing it up. He's saying, you claim to be a descendant of Jacob, you Samaritans, but look at the type of mess that you guys are in. You have 5 different gods that you are worshipping. You have erected shrines, and this is what you are worshipping. But we Jews know whom we worship, because salvation is of the Jews. Now you see, a lot of people have said this woman was promiscuous, but if you read the text, there's nothing mentioned in the text about her being promiscuous. What is actually happening in the text, Jesus is actually addressing worship with this woman. This woman was a seeker. She wanted to know more, because she says, according to the Torah says, the Messiah, who is the Christ, comes, will tell us everything. And Jesus says, the one who is talking to you right now is he. I am he. I am the Messiah. So now this woman, now all of a sudden she drops her water jar, and she runs off to the village and say, come and see a man that has told me everything that I have ever done. So now I want you to think, as you're sitting back home, I want you to think for a moment. If this woman, number 1, was so promiscuous as other people have claimed this woman to be, why would people in her village believe her? Because they would have known what she was capable of and what she was doing, because these people were living in a secluded environment. They would have known her, and if this was the case, then some of the men would have been guilty. It would have been one of them, because they didn't accept any strangers and foreigners to reside in their village. And secondly, why would people take her serious if she tells them, come and see a man? Because the village comes to her and to Jesus, and they say, we do no longer believe based on what you said, but we believe based on what we've heard ourselves. So they spoke to Jesus. They invited him to stay over and teach them some more about their religion and be set right with God. So basically what we find in the book of John chapter 4, we find that Jesus reaches out to this woman who was a seeker, just like you and me may be seeking to have a right relationship with God. Because after all, if we look at the 2 commandments in the Old Testament, the first commandment has to do with worshiping other gods, and the 7th commandment has to do with being faithful to your spouse. So basically the 2 are sort of related, because if you worship God, that's your husband, just like you have your husband and wife, in which commandment number 7 addresses. So Jesus is saying, woman, you have problems in your family setup. I want to help you to change allegiance so that you can have the right husband, so to speak, meaning the right God, meaning the God of Israel. So he's saying, if you want your problems to be solved, they must not begin at your with worship, but they must begin with the relationship that you have with God, and everything else sort of falls into place. So in chapter 20, in verse 20, this woman says, my ancestors worshipped in this mountain, but you say in Jerusalem is the place of worship. Also, again, crucial for us to understand the Old Testament when it comes to such utterances in the text. Because in Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 5, the text is very explicit. It says, you shall seek the place that the Lord your God will choose out for your tribes, meaning the tribes of Israel, the 12 tribes of Israel, and his habitant, and where he will put his name, and there you will worship. So what Jesus is saying is basically connected to Deuteronomy 12, because Jerusalem was a temple, was a place where all Jews were summoned to come and worship God, particularly for the great feast, Sukkot, Tabernacles, and Passover. Those were the great, the three major religious festivals. The Tabernacles, Passover, and Pentecost. Those three were quite crucial. So they were summoned to come. So Jesus is referring to this. He's saying, we worship what we know, but you worship what you don't know, because salvation is of the Jews. Now, Jesus also complicates things a little bit as you read the text. He says, the time is coming when neither in this temple, in this mountain, nor in Jerusalem worship, because the Father seeks a worshiper who worships him in truth and in spirit. So now you have to understand this. Jesus is actually referring to a time where people will begin to worship God based not in coming to a physical temple, but they themselves will become physical temples, which I will address in my next video. So I will not get into it now. I would leave it here now for you to ponder on what I've said. Read the text again and see what is happening in the discourse, so you'll understand why Jesus is going to Samaria, into the village of drunkards in Sychar, meaning Sychar drunkards, and the whole village of drunkards basically accepts the message of Jesus, according to John the Evangelist, who tells us what actually happened when Jesus was going into this village. And like I said, for you, I'm recapping so that you understand that teaching women was shunned from ancient rabbinic teaching. Jesus, as a rabbi, he endorsed it. Hence, even his disciples were surprised that he's talking to a woman. It's in the text, because they were taught that speaking to women is a sign of idleness. So Jesus broke all the rules of his time. So, because he reached out, because for him there was no dichotomy between woman and man. He believed every man, every human being, whether male or female, must be taught the word of God, because the word of God is for everyone. So this woman was very instrumental to Jesus, because she brought the message to the village of drunkards, and the whole village basically was converted to the message of this woman who was seeking to understand to have a proper relationship with God. I hope I have helped you. If you like this message that you've heard and how we read some of these texts, and as I'll probably help you as we go on in reading some of these texts, click on our subscription button to be notified when a new video is uploaded by Peluso Ministries. I pray and hope that God will bless you. I know many of you are going through a rough time with this pandemic of coronavirus when this video is recorded. And I hope God will be with you and bless you and enrich you as you seek to have a proper relationship with him and to establish a proper way of worshiping God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I thank you, and God bless you.